Hello, my name's Rob. I am a member and an elder here at Carwent Baptist Chapel. This is my story. I was born into a large Catholic family. My parents immigrated to the States from Portugal in the late 60s. I was born there in the early 70s. Born and raised a Catholic, as I said. I attended Catholic church from a very early age. It was very much a very Portuguese Catholic community that I grew up in. I can honestly say that I didn't even know other churches outside of the Catholic Church existed till I was well into my teenage years. From a very early age, 4, 5 perhaps, I was very conscious. I knew, I had no doubt that there was a God, and that there was a heaven and that there was a hell. And I would spend a lot of time thinking about this. In fact, there were some nights where I cried myself to sleep because I was afraid to die. I knew I wasn't good enough to get into heaven, and I didn't want to die and go to hell. I went all the way through in the Catholic Church, First Communion, confirmation. I tried to live a good life. Roman Catholic theology tells us that it's by faith and good works that we get into heaven. In other words, we have to make ourselves acceptable to God. As I got into my teenage years, my later teenage years, I befriended some Christian people, and they would tell me about the Bible. And as I learned more and more about the Bible, I began to see that the Catholic Church and its theology wasn't aligned with the Bible. This carried on into the Navy. I joined the Navy when I was 19, 20 years old, and I was on submarines, and I met Christian men that were, they were in the Navy as well, and they would tell me about Christianity. They would talk to me about the Bible. They would tell to me about Jesus Christ. But it's funny because throughout these years, we would talk about Christian things to different Christians in different contexts. God was very gracious to bring Christians into my life. But I never remember hearing the gospel. I never remember hearing that Jesus lived for my behalf, on my behalf, and he died on my behalf. Perhaps we had conversations like that, but perhaps there was a veil. Perhaps I just didn't see it. Perhaps I just didn't hear it. And it wasn't until I met my wife-to-be, I would say she was the biggest influence in my life up until that point. And we would have great conversations about the Bible, about the Lord Jesus Christ. I started reading good Christian books, and I began to see that Jesus Christ had done what I could not do. I could not make myself acceptable to God. All throughout my teenage years, into my early 20s, I tried to live a good moral life. I wasn't perfect. I strayed just like every other teenager and young man. But there was always that in the back of my head that there is a heaven, that there is a hell, and one day you're going to have to stand before God. And so it was always a trying to live that life good enough. And I look back on it now, and I realize that I was angry. I was angry with God because He was demanding something from me, a perfect life, that I couldn't give Him. And then He threatened me with hell because of it. And that was hard for me. And I didn't have very good thoughts about God, although I continued to try to please God and to earn His acceptance. But going back to what I was saying about meeting my wife and beginning to read good Christian books, I began to understand the gospel. I began to see that the God became man in the person of Jesus Christ. And He lived that perfect life for me. And He went to the cross to die for the sins that I had committed and all the sins that I would commit henceforth. And so shortly before Charlotte, my wife, and I were married, I made a profession of faith. But fast forward about a year and a half into that time, and I wasn't very happy, and I was lacking joy. Perhaps I was spiritually depressed. And I think because my whole life I had been taught that I had to bring something before God. Excuse me. I think I carried that into my Christian life. And I was lacking assurance. I was lacking that I was a child of God. I was lacking that knowledge, that assurity that I was His. And I remember we were at my parents' house in America, and this was the turning point, really. I was sat at the dining room table. I was by myself in the house, I think, and I was reading Romans chapter 3. And as I read Romans chapter 3, I wish I had it here in front of you to read it, but I would recommend reading verses somewhere between 19 to 25. And it told me that God was offering a righteousness to me as a gift. And I remember pushing away from the table, and I got down on my hands and my knees, and I turned that portion of the Bible into a prayer. And I thanked God. I thanked God that Jesus Christ had come into the world to live the life I couldn't live. And I thanked God that Christ, had gone to the cross to bear my sin, my guilt, and that He bore the punishment and the wrath of God that I deserved. And I remember it was like floodgates were opened. I don't know how else to describe it. And joy and peace and love just filled my heart, my whole being. And from that point on, I knew that I was accepted by God because of Jesus Christ and not my own doing. And I was just a changed man. And perhaps you're watching this. I don't know how many Catholics are in this part, but you could be a religious person trying to earn your way to heaven. And I can tell you right now, you can't. It's not possible. But it is possible through someone else. Jesus Christ has lived that life that you cannot live. And he offers you that righteousness. See, for me, it was that obedience. I couldn't obey God. And by trusting in the Lord Jesus Christ, his obedience, his righteousness is put on to the Christian believer, so that when God looks at you now, he sees the very obedience of his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's something that the Catholic Church, other religions don't offer. Every religion except biblical Christianity, it puts on you to do something. But biblical Christianity begins with God has done it. Jesus Christ has done it. And we come into that acceptance, that assurity of heaven by putting our faith, by putting our trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank God for what he's done in my life. I thank God that he answered the prayers of that young boy 25 years later by showing me the Lord Jesus through the scriptures. And now I do try to obey God, but I don't do it in a sense that I'm trying to earn his acceptance. I do it out of love for him, for what he has done for me. Well, I hope you find that helpful. Thank you for listening. God bless you all.